80 years ago, a lean 18-year-old from the farmland of Idaho unknowingly made history. High on the Grand Teton and seeking to explore an unclimbed route, he separated from the group he was helping guide. Wearing borrowed, oversized football shoes with leather cleats, he scrambled alone over a ridge, across a gully, and onto a broad ledge that traverses the sheer west face of the Grand Teton. For several minutes, he stood at the edge, pondering his options. Finally, the athletic teenager jumped, barely finding purchase on a large boulder sitting on the opposite side. From there, he soloed upwards without protection, scrambling through chimneys and balancing up blank slabs of perfect granite until he reunited with his party on the summit. Thus began a remarkable story about a man, a mountain, and a guide service. The man would come to be associated with the mountain like no other mountaineer, both then and now inextricably linked by the guide service he helped develop into the symbol of North American guiding excellence, Exum Mountain Guides. Since then, Exum Guides have led over 50,000 climbers to the summit of the Grand Teton. The story of those 80 years is a story of many, many exceptional men and women, all of them supremely talented mountaineers who chose to spend the better part of their summers teaching novice climbers how to climb, how to handle ropes, and how to belay, as well as guiding them on ascents of the Grand Teton and other peaks. The man who helped start it all and who made the daring leap that long ago summer day was Glenn Exum. Little did he realize at the time the magnitude of his discovery that day back in 1931. For the route he pioneered would eventually become the main attraction of one of North America's great alpine adventures, an ascent of the 13,770-foot Grand Teton in northwestern Wyoming. It would serve as the enticement for thousands of novice mountaineers possessing nothing more than a strong body and desire to tackle an ascent of the strikingly beautiful peak. The combination of a largely unexplored mountain range, a freewheeling Wild West culture, and the magnetic personalities of Paul and Glenn attracted some of the top mountaineers of the day to climb in the Tetons and sign on as guides, forging a tradition of excellence based on mountaineering experience that continues to this day. Hours could be spent detailing who has guided for Exum over the past 80 years and listening to their accomplishments. However, we are limited in this all too brief photo montage to a short list of highlights. To begin, we turn to the Himalaya, home of the world's highest peaks, where Exum guides have left their mark since the early days of American Himalayan expeditions. 7 years after Glenn's discovery of the Exum Ridge, Paul would join the first American expedition to K2, setting a record for days spent above 20,000 feet without oxygen and climbing to 26,000 feet. These monumental efforts on K2 were a precursor of Exum Guides' next major Himalayan accomplishment, the participation in the 1963 first American ascent of Everest and the first ever traverse of the world's highest mountain. Exum Mountain Guides Jake Breitenbach, Barry Corbett, Dick Pawnell, Dave Dingman, and Willie Unsold helped Lou Whitaker become the first American to summit the highest point on Earth. But the boldest climbing by far was pulled off by Unsold and Tom Hornbein when they climbed 2,000 feet of unknown terrain while making the first ascent of the West Ridge and traversing over the top of the peak. On descent, they survived a forced bivouac above 8,000 meters, yet survived relatively unscathed save for frostbitten toes. It was one of the most committing climbs and boldest of feats yet in the annals of Himalayan climbing. Soon thereafter, another Exum guide, Al Reed, began leaving his mark in the Himalaya, helping to organize expeditions to peaks such as Dhaulagiri, Cholatse, Gari Shankar, and in 1986, Everest from the north side. Nancy Fagan was the first Exum guide to summit the world's highest peak, followed a few years later by Amy Bullard. Amy would also go on to direct the Sherpa School in Nepal, a school that teaches mountaineering skills to the Sherpas who lead and haul gear for foreign expeditions to Himalayan peaks. Back in the foreboding Karakoram Range, Exum guides paved the way for the modern era of high-altitude big wall climbing. In 1977, Kim Schmitz anchored a strong team including Galen Rowell, Jim Morrissey, and Dennis Hennick on an ascent of the Great Trango Tower. On the long-closed Chinese side of the Karakoram, Exum guide Jack Turner in 1983 led a committing trek through stunning alpine terrain across swollen rivers and over glaciers to the base of the north side of K2. This was the first ever American expedition to visit that side of the mountain. In 1986, Tom Hargis became the first and to this day one of the only Americans to summit Gasherbrum 4. The 90s ushered in a new era of bold, fast, and light Himalayan ascents, as well as an era of Himalayan guiding, and no one exemplified this style better than Alex Lowe. Alex sprinted up the easy terrain no matter what the elevation on peaks such as Annapurna, Everest, and Kantingri, the latter of which he climbed solo in 10 hours. He made light of incredibly hard technical climbing on peaks such as Kwangdi Nup, Kusum Kangaroo, and the Great Trango Tower. He even guided Everest, as did Human Apran in early Everest guide Jim Williams. Williams, recipient of the Explorers Club prestigious Lowell Award in 2009, had early established himself as one of the preeminent Seven Summits guides. First ascents of some of the hardest routes in the range can be chalked up to Kevin Mahoney and Ben Gilmore. In 1959, guides Jake Brettenbach, Barry Corbett, Bill Buckingham, and climbing ranger Pete Sinclair climbed the West Ridge on the immense south face of America's highest peak, Denali. 4 years later, in 1963, while several of Exum guides were on Everest, guides Peter Lev, Al Reed, Rod Newcomb, Jed Williamson, and Fred Wright made the first ascent of the long and committing east buttress of Denali. In the modern era, Alex Lowe left his mark on the Moonflower Buttress as well as other climbs, while Jack Tackle returned year after year to pick off difficult first ascents on numerous peaks and walls, many with former Exum guide Jim Danini. First ascents of some of the hardest routes can be chalked up to Kevin Mahoney and Ben Gilmore, at times in abysmal weather conditions. Their route, Arctic Rage, on the Moose's Tooth was nominated for the Piolet d'Or, the world's most coveted award granted for excellence in the art of alpinism. As spectacular as these far-flung mountaineering feats are, it's worth remembering that the training that prepared mountaineers for their climbs abroad took place back home in the Tetons. Indeed, one of the pleasures of climbing in the Tetons is knowing that some of the world's great mountaineers use the same handholds, and it's common to pass old pitons that may have been placed by Dick Emerson, Jack Durrance, Willie Unsold, or Art Gilkey. There is no shortage of firsts that Exum guides have not been part of in the Tetons, from Paul Petzold's first ascent of the North Face to Hans Jonestone's and Greg Collins's ascent of the modern-day test piece, the Golden Pillar, the hardest route on the North Face, and perhaps the hardest route in the range. And mountain feats such as the 6.5-hour blast across the entire Grand Traverse by Rolando Garibaldi have become legendary. Aside from hard climbing, the Tetons, covered as they are in snow for 8 months of the year, are also the North American epicenter of one of the less-known mountaineering dark arts, ski mountaineering. Exum guides have contributed substantially in this realm, leaving no corner of the range unexplored for skiing opportunities. But one feat would dwarf all others and become one of the most significant ski mountaineering feats ever in the United States. In June 1971, Bill Briggs hauled his 210-centimeter skis to the summit of the Grand Teton and carved turns through the heavy wet snow down the southeast ridge. 11 years later, Rick Wyatt strapped into freeheel bindings reinforced with door hinges and made the first ever freeheel descent of the Grand. The feat ushered in a new era of extreme skiing in the Tetons, but one individual in particular picked up the torch and led the way to an era when ski descents of the Grand would become commonplace. This man, Tom Turiano, would pursue first descents with unmatched zeal and methodical determination. Tom skied the Grand a few times, but he was far more interested in epic tours far into the Tetons to seek out obscure peaks no one had ever visited and that few have visited since. Two other local guides fell under Tom's wings in the latter stages of his quest, Stephen Koch and Mark Newcomb. Koch, the first to haul a snowboard into the high peaks on a routine basis, combined raw energy, boldness, and vision as he ticked off first descent after first descent. Newcomb also teamed up with Exum guide Hans Johnstone and ski mountaineering legend and Exum guide Doug Coombs, tackling two of the boldest and most coveted first descents on the Grand Teton, the Hasek McGowan Couloir on the peak's north side with Johnstone, and their otter body route on the peak's southeast face with Coombs. Coombs, at one point described by Outside Magazine as arguably the best skier in the world, along with his wife Emily, used his ski mountaineering talent and vision to found Valdez Heliski Guides, the preeminent heli-ski guide service in Alaska's Chugach Range. In 2003, versed in the art of steep skiing, Coombs and Newcomb eventually persuaded Exum's directors to allow their guides to ski guide the Grand Teton. Soon, several trips a year were delivering a guided experience that has to rank among the most stupendous in North America, a ski descent from the summit of the Grand Teton. Nat Petridge, now the president of Exum, and fellow guide Bill Anderson chalked up another first when they guided the Grand in February, rather than in late May or early June. In February, so long as the snow is stable, one can ski from the top of the Grand all the way back to the car, a descent of over 7,000 vertical feet that can deliver delightful powder skiing as well as thrilling steep skiing. As if leaving tracks all over the Northern Hemisphere weren't enough, Exum guides have also pioneered climbs throughout the Southern Hemisphere. Barry Corbett participated in the first ascent of Mount Vincent, the highest peak in Antarctica. And in the stark, wind-hammered granite spires of Patagonia, Exum guides David Carman and John Bragg, along with Jay Wilson, made the first alpine-style ascent of Cerro Torre. Far from the frozen peak, Exum guides have also excelled on sun-baked granite walls and limestone crags around the world. Exum guide and Yosemite legend Chuck Pratt made the first ever ascent of a 510. Kim Smits made several bold ascents on Yosemite's Big Wall, and Nancy Fagan, a brilliant climber, was a participant on some of the modern era's first speed climbs of El Capitan and Half Dome. Currently, Exum guide Brendan O'Neill has on-site climbed several 513s and is knocking on the door of climbing 514, a mere increment below the hardest climbs in the world. Another famous woman climber and Exum guide, Maddie Schaefer, founded Women That Rock, a vehicle through which countless women have entered the sport. Exum has also contributed substantially throughout its history to the training of soldiers dispatched to fight in mountainous terrain around the world. Paul Petzold himself helped train the famous 10th Mountain Division, and several Exum guides today train special ops and logistical support teams in mountain travel and survival before they are deployed to the mountains of Iraq and Afghanistan. As we said at the outset, our time here cannot begin to do justice to the accomplishment of Exum guides over the past 80 years of our history as a guide service. Nevertheless, we hope we have said enough to give you a glimpse of our world, a world that is anything but flat, that is filled with a sense of wonder and adventure, that never ceases to beckon one higher, and that holds the continued promise of a summit. Summer after summer, individuals, groups, families, and couples sign up to take our 2-day series of classes that require no prior climbing experience to prepare for ascent of the Grand Teton. Most return to climb other peaks and sharpen their skills. Some return often enough to complete our own 7 summits, comprised in ascent of the range's highest peaks. Clients with Exum continually find they discover strengths they never knew they had as they climb, scramble, belay, and ascend ever higher towards the summit of the Grand. Thus, we finish with an acknowledgement of the accomplishments of the thousands of clients who have climbed with us over the past 80 years. We are proud of our distinctive traditions and our guides who have established and exemplify the highest standard of excellence in the art of guiding. We invite you to join us as we celebrate 80 years of guiding and as we continue our exploration of the vertical, whether it's a new route in the Tetons or a hidden peak in some far-off mountain range.